to make it out, it's just to get the job done. Cause in the wild, wild west, you gotta take what.
Hello, I'm Ryan Dunnigan.
And I'm James Artville.
And this is Octorok Talk. We're just, this is somewhat of a kind of a spin-off podcast of Old Man Orange podcast. That's a podcast I do with a friend of mine named Spencer. We'll usually pick a topic and have a free flow conversation. Sometimes we do retrospects. Sometimes we, just kind of ramble on with whatever. And this one's going to be a little different. This one's just, I find that you kind of get a different show with a different co-host. And James is a good friend of mine. And he's been one of my best friends since like the 5th grade. And just figured, hey, let's try out this secondary show. And for time being, it's probably going to, first episode or two is probably going to pop up on the Old Man Orange feed. After that, it's probably going to get its own. So just something we're trying out. James, what do you do? Why don't you let the audience know about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I'm a graphic designer and digital illustrator. I like to make digital art, fan art, comics, and that kind of thing.
And you've been doing that for a while. You have an Instagram page that has a lot of great artwork on there. And from there, just a little bit ago, you were actually, it's one of those things like, we met back in the 5th grade, and it was one of those things where we stayed in contact. You actually moved to Oregon like around a little after the 6th grade, and then since then we stayed in contact. And it'd be one of those things, we might have not kept in contact for like, almost a few months or something, but then after a while one of us would reach out. So it's been going on ever since, we've both kind of gone different directions in our lives, but still stayed in contact. And a little bit ago you came up and visited San Francisco, and we it was kind of like no time has passed, and it was just like, man, this is so much fun. I want to actually have a reason to do this more often. It's like, let's try a podcast, let's try this one out. So yeah,
it's one of those relationships where time nor distance seems to make a difference. We just pick up where we left off, and seems like we're cut from the same cloth. The way that we resonate, the way that we vibe, it just it's pretty strong.
Mm-hmm. And it's been a while, so I'm like, you know what? I want to find a reason for us to be able to, just whether it be, just bullshitting about video games or just having a casual conversation about whatever, or even like if it gets into a deep conversation, it gets into a deep conversation. But I just figured, hey, might as well just try out another show. Why not? Couldn't hurt. And I think hopefully people don't feel misled with the name Octorok Talk, because it sounds very Zelda exclusive, which it won't be. I just know that Zelda's your favorite thing, and I don't know, it rhymed. that's the reason I came to that.
No, yeah, I agree. It is kind of catchy. I could talk your ear off about The Legend of Zelda. That's definitely for sure. But yeah, all things gaming, movies, comics, just life in general. I'm open to anything.
Yeah, so originally when we first were talking about doing this, we were talking about doing like a deep dive into Zelda, but then I'm like, you know what? There is a million deep dives into Zelda, and I figured, why don't we just start with first episode, video games that were really formative for you. And, we could go into, rather than a deep dive into this game and the development of the game, more of kind of like how's it coming out at you from a personal angle, how that game affect you, how that kind of change your opinion on, help you form opinions on gaming or whatever else around that time, which moving forward. So I think that I'm sure Zelda is going to come up in there for both of us, more than likely. I'd be really surprised if it didn't. So there's our excuse for the title right there. We say on the Old Man Orange podcast, we're almost kind of like a Batman podcast. We just almost find a way to fit Batman in every conversation, one way or the other. But so it might be like that with Zelda on this one, but we'll see what happens. Anyway, why don't you start? We'll go like in chronological order. It doesn't have to be anything too deep or too focused, but more just by generation. Like, what's probably, for you, one of the first really formative games that you played?
Right. You and I were, we're millennials. We were born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s. So we were kind of like the ripe generation for home consoles. The NES came around and saved the industry. And so with that, the Nintendo Entertainment System, you got to talk about Super Mario Brothers. that game obviously came, bundled with the system, flew into, millions of households, and just it changed the generation.
Yeah, and Mario probably like I think two of the first things I was into as a kid was Ninja Turtles and Mario. And I still like the Ninja Turtles. I'm not like a diehard fan of them anymore, but I still like them. Like if a movie comes out, I'll check it out. I'm kind of curious with the comics every so often. But Mario's the thing that stayed with me. And I remember liking Mario initially, like on the NES, the original NES. But then the first one that kind of really get me into games was Super Mario World on the SNES, and that one, just something about that game really stood out to me. And that I don't really know why, but I remember when I was younger. I don't know if you had this, but when I was younger, I was like, oh, I can't play a video game. That's too complicated for me. It's that's for more advanced minds than mine. But then sure enough, you just eventually like, all right, I'm gonna be brave. Let's see what happens. I was like, I don't want to kill Mario. I don't want to be responsible for him dying. That was almost kind of the way I moved about it when I was a kid.
Yeah, the SNES was had so many great games on there, and the funny thing is, growing up, I never owned one, but everyone I knew had one. My neighbor next door, a friend of mine, my cousins in Mexico. So, every chance I had, I took. I wanted to play it, and definitely Super Mario World was the game to play. It was 2-player on the same map, so that was definitely a very bonding experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, it was one of those things where it was weird because my brother had a Super Nintendo, and it was like one of those things where he had a Super Nintendo, and then he traded his NES for a Super Nintendo. But the person who had the Super Nintendo originally, they thought they got confused on what was which was which. They honestly didn't know the difference between the NES and Super Nintendo. It's just like you guys already had the they literally got confused which one they had. So then we had Super Mario for like we had the Super Nintendo for like maybe like 3 months before it got traded back. For those 3 months, it's like, oh my god, this is magical, and that was like where I first kind of found myself getting into it. Just maybe it was the characters, the color scheme, just something about that game stood out more than others.
Yeah, every now and then still, I'll find myself humming or whistling, just some of the music from that game, and that just brings the nostalgia, those good feelings, the memories. And it's been a while since I've actually sat down and played it, but I know if I did, it would be a good time, even after all these years.
I feel like there's some games you're great at as a kid and you just get kind of worse at as you get older, because I have a Super Nintendo Classic now, and first thing I did when I got home, when I got there, I was like, oh, I'm going to play Super Mario, Super Mario World, and then sure enough, I'm just like, I suck at it now. Like, it's one of those things where I'm just like, God, why do it's left or right or jump, that's all it is. Why do I have so much trouble with this game now? But I still love it. I'm not going to dock the game. I remember really was kind of what really kind of got me into it was when Game Boy Advance came out and that game was available as a port. I'm like, oh my god, yes, please, But going on to that era, Super Nintendo was kind of what got me ultimately into video games, at least in characters of it in the first place. And the next ones that followed were Mario Kart, like the only ones from that generation, because there's the 16-bit generation and 8-bit generation, and there's the ones that stand out to you. But there's when I think back on it, there's only really a handful of games that I really grew up with. Because when you're a kid, it's what your friend has next door, and what you have. And as a kid, for me, it was just kind of like, okay, here's your one game for Christmas, here's your one game for your birthday or whatever. Sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you get two, but usually it's the one game.
Yeah, like I mentioned, I didn't have an SNES growing up, but I did have a Sega Genesis. So that was my 16-bit home console. And boy oh boy, back then the console wars were vicious. It got personal.
Like you pick a side. It's either Mario or Sonic. You can't have both. That was almost the way the ads treated it. I remember they had like super like a Game Gear ad, like, why don't you use a Game Boy for? And it was just like showed like a Game Boy used as like a door stopper or something like that.
Yeah, friendships were broken from playground fights over who was better.
Yeah, that that just kind of I'm saying as if that went away. That's still around if you look long enough. But yeah, there was that point though where it's just like I remember I felt like I was kind of cheating on Mario when it came to Sonic, because like Sonic the Hedgehog was one of those ones where, I'm not gonna lie, when I first saw him, I thought he was punk rock Felix the Cat. That's what I really thought he was. Like, oh, it's Felix the Cat. He's just like, the punk rock version of him. I'm like, oh, it's something different. It just because he has that eyes. He has those eyes and the mouth, kind of like that old 1920s cartoony look. Yeah. And then, sure enough, I got into that game, and my brother had a Genesis, and that came with the Genesis, the first one. So I remember playing that, and then, I didn't it was more my brother's system that I would sometimes play, and I ended up getting, the only games I had for it, he had mostly sports titles and whatnot. Only games I had for it was, like, that Sonic game, Sonic and Knuckles, and then, like, Toy Story. Toy Story was a weird-ass game. I remember, like, being filled with whimsy watching that movie. And then you play that game, and it's just like one of those things like, as soon as Andy leaves, the toys all try to kill each other. Like, really? Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
Pixar left that part out.
That game frustrated me. I was never able to finish it. That RC car level, man, that's just...
The RC car level was brutal. And it was more one of those things where it wasn't even... You knew it wasn't that good of a game, but you kind of force yourself to smile because that's back where you're like, oh, wow, this is the closest thing I'm going to be able to do to play the movie. And then... you play the game like, oh wow, no, this is rough, So, and that was at a point when Disney was actually their side-scrolling games based off their movies were good, like Aladdin. Aladdin's like the really good one. I think Lion King was pretty good too, but that one was just that was rough. That was a rough game. But and then I remember there's a part where Buzz Lightyear or Woody has a nightmare, and he has this Nightmare on Elm Street where he has to fight a giant Buzz Lightyear, and the way to beat him is whip him in the leg.
His Achilles heel.
Yeah, literally that. So, but which thinking back on it, that's weird because what came out first, Hercules or Toy Story? Because I feel like Hercules came out first, but that was on the PlayStation. But then this one was on, maybe it's the other way around. I don't remember, but yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't matter. Either way. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, no, that was my only two Genesis games. You remember you were telling me before, I forgot, you had that Pac-Man Genesis game that was really weird.
Yeah, it was like a side-scrolling adventure game where you talk to people, there was dialogue, and it kind of reminded me of Mario is Missing. Maybe it was...
like point and click.
Maybe it was educational. I don't remember. I didn't really play it much, but I was definitely disappointed because I was expecting... ghosts and pellets and mazes and stuff,
I remember that game, it was just because Pac-Man would just wander off. You have to shoot him with like pellets, like, no, you're going the wrong way. So you like shoot him with a BB gun off screen to get him to turn around or something like that. It was something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember much. I've blocked it out. But
you almost had to make a path for him so he wouldn't die.
I wonder how similar it was in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. There's a Pac-Man level called Pac-Land. And that's a side-scrolling level, and it's horrendous. It's one of the worst stages in the game.
Like, look, we felt it was important. We stay true to the original shitty game that came out.
I guess so. They found it appropriate to bring it in.
Well, I think like, well, what do we got? How many Pac-Man stages can we have? Well, we got this maze, we got that maze. Like, oh, I think we have to do only thing we can do. Like, yeah, if we're going to mix it up, which. We got to go into Pandora's box here. They turn two keys at the same time. Like, all right, here it is, Pac World.
Not tournament friendly, that's for sure.
Yeah. So that one, I remember, for me, that was... Well, I remember that was when I played at your house. I think we were both... I think you weren't even like, dude, you got to check it out. You're just like, it's weird, but here, just see for yourself. And that was at 5th grade when you just kind of liked anything thrown in front of you just about.
Yeah. I had a few other games like Star Trek: The Next Generation. I think I had Altered Beast.
Mm-hmm.
And that.
But yeah, you oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Hell, I mean, now I have the Sega Classic, so all those games on there, and it's just a great way to relive those memories. But the best thing that I remember about my Sega Genesis was taking it to Funko Land, selling it, and taking that money and buying Super Smash Brothers for the Nintendo 64. Best decision of my life. Yeah.
We'll come back to that, but yeah, thinking back, like God, you got how many games did you give off in a whole system just for Smash Brothers? Then again, that's probably like $5 for the whole system.
No, it paid for the whole thing.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Remember, if we're going in chronological order there, I guess the next thing up for us is kind of PlayStation 64 era, which obviously the big ones for that are like, I didn't really have a PlayStation. PlayStation was definitely still the enemy to me at that time. There were still friends that would have one, and you may play this game or that game at their place. But I remember I hated Crash Bandicoot just because he seemed like a dumb, inbred version of Mario and Sonic. He had he was trying to go that kind of wacky, kind of Sonic aesthetic, but then had the Mario kind of platforming, but it was kind of more narrowed down. And then just like, I can't get behind. I can't get behind this guy. I just can't. And plus, I think it was one of those things I saw. Like, there's some magazine. Oh, this is all it would take when you're a kid. There was a magazine I remember, and it was probably something on just sales from Nintendo to Sony, but it showed Crash Bandicoot throwing like a wad of mud in Mario's face. I was like, no, it wouldn't happen that way. And just, it's funny what could spur a kid to be like, no, anti-Sony until PlayStation 2, really,
Right. I mean, the commercials for Crash Bandicoot straight up had somebody dressed up as Crash in a big mascot costume speaking with a megaphone in front of the Nintendo headquarters in Washington.
Yeah, I remember that. And just be like, yeah, man, Crash Bandicoot's trying to have this weird comeback now, and I'm guessing a couple of games have come out, so I guess it's doing all right. But I kind of like how Crash now has games on Nintendo platforms. Like, well, look who came walking in.
It wouldn't surprise me if he turns out to be one of the upcoming DLC characters in Smash.
Don't waste it on that. Really, don't waste it on that. I was already kind of like, oh, this Persona, this little emo kid from Persona 5. No, I'm not interested.
Well, you never know. They have Sakurai has surprised us more than once.
Well, he came out with Piranha Plant of all characters. Like, really, Piranha Plant? So that made us think, well, it could be anything. But yeah. But anyway, going into Genesis era and 64 and PlayStation era, all that. I think the first two big ones for me personally that are on that list are like Mario 64. There's something, it didn't really have that oomph that Mario World had for me at first, but still it was a big deal. The level of the jump that game made for because before when you're a kid, you can kind of see that this is just something different. This is a jump from what it was, but there's that point when you're younger when like, oh God, what's over this hill? And you just spend hours just trying to get over this one little hill, thinking you're going to come across a secret level because you don't realize how games are made. Like, oh, it's just an infinite abyss of a cliff. And yeah.
You said make a jump, pun intended. The open world aspect of being able to freely roam a 3D environment for the first time, it was huge. And I mean, Mario 64 basically defined what 3D platforming is, and everybody else has since tried to copy that formula and recreate that success.
Yeah, and it is one of those things, looking back, like you can say, okay, camera's a little shaky, wish it was a little smoother in some spots, but you gotta keep in mind for when it came out and what it did was very revolutionary. And it was, you don't realize it as a kid, but it really had great game design in the aspect of, it doesn't just like, hey there, before you go on an adventure, here's how you jump, here's how you do this. It just threw you in an area, like, you figure it out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it encouraged curiosity, discovery.
Mm-hmm.
And
had that, and go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk a lot about Mario 64. What was the other game that you wanted to mention on that list?
Well, I mean, probably more than the two, but I mean, like, Star Fox 64 was definitely a big one for me. It was just that massive jump into, like, oh my God, wait, they're talking? And then that game had just a massive impact on me, just as a kid. And no other Star Fox game has been as good as that one, in my opinion, but still, there's been good ones. People want to discount, like, other ones. Like, I think that, well, I don't care about the Adventure Planet, Dinosaur Planet one, But I really did like Assault for the GameCube, even though that one wasn't perfect. It was still a fun game, but none of them have reached that level that Star Fox 64 did. There was just something. It's really Nintendo at that time had a good eye for simplicity, but knowing to amp up this over here or that over there. You know what I mean? Kind of give it its own signature.
Yeah, the 3DS remake was a pretty good game too, just as good or better. And the reason is because they didn't change the control scheme. They didn't change, the levels. That it was already, such a good game to begin with. Yeah, I remember it was so cinematic that I would sit down, and I would just play through the campaign, and essentially it'd be like a 45-minute movie, that you play through. And I remember trying to impress everyone, my sisters, my buddies, my dad, asking them to come in and sit and watch me play. And of course I'd try to show off, try to hit sick combos, try to take the more difficult route and, unlock the secret ending, and always just trying to impress them, one, with the game, because I loved it so much, and also, two, with, how good I was at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's that, and there's also, because that game, it was something you could knock out pretty quickly, but then there's different routes depending on which way you go in the level. And I remember something with that game, because when you play it the first time through, just straight through, you're like, okay, you fight a big giant space robot, then his face appears at the end. Oh, I'm still out there, you missed me, And then you're like, wait, what? And then you just notice little things here and there. You go about that, and then, you have the thing where, wait, the ghost of your dad leads you out, and it has this whole, it got all really Star Wars. I mean, it's already in space with spaceships, but I mean, Star Warsy and like the Force Ghost kind of like, your father died here too, as you will. And as a kid, you're like, oh my God, there's a narrative plot there's a narrative like plot through this. Oh my God, this actually, it feels kind of like a movie. Now like every game does that, but at the time you're like, oh my God, this is like groundbreaking in storytelling. Like, not really, but at the time it was like a big jump for you because you weren't used to seeing that in most games around there.
Yeah, and PlayStation, because it was CD based, they definitely had the upper hand when it came to audio. So N64, a lot of those games, it didn't have the capacity to include so many voice tracks. So that again made Star Fox 64 stand out amongst other N64 games for that very reason.
That game was also the source of a lot of people just debating a lot. I remember on playgrounds, just because I had one kid who thought that all the characters were robots. Like, no, dude, they're animals. No, I'm pretty sure they're all robots. Maybe they're robots underneath those animal skin or something. Like, why would you say? Because when you like run, like kids would see one little thing, and they just run with the rest of it. It says, well, you're in the version, because there's a thing where you could be them just on the ground, and they do that weird like Nazi walk where their legs go all the way out in front of them, and running with a bazooka. And I remember when they die in that, they kind of like go lopsided, like their ship about to crash, and they explode. There's no gore, just exploding, and then like I remember she's like, "Really? That's your basis for their fucking robots?" He's like, "Yep." I'm like, all right.
Sounds like a game theory to me.
Yeah, it's one of those things. But I remember there's a whole thing where they have amputated legs in older games, but they kind of discontinued that.
Yeah.
Do you know that one? The robot leg things?
Yeah, the models, the clay models from the first game, they all had very metallic looking legs.
I think it was something like there's something in the lore at that point where if you're going too fast, that like blood would rush to your legs. So something about those robot legs or something was supposed to counteract that or something like that. But I don't know. That's just something I remember hearing. And they just like, nah. Having animals cut off their legs so they can fly spaceships sounds like it's too much to explain to a kid. They're just animals.
Yeah, obviously people are looking into it more than it's necessary. So we've already been talking for almost a half an hour here, and we haven't talked about Zelda. And partly because
we were building up to it.
When it came to the NES and the SNES, I missed out. I never played those games, those Zelda games. My first entry into the series was with Nintendo 64. So the first time I picked up a controller, I think it was at the shopping mall. It was a demo, Kokiri Forest. here is this kid in green with a sword and a shield, and it was the best thing ever. It was like all my fantasies lived out right there, on that kiosk. And I just, Ocarina of Time still to this day holds a place in my heart as one of my favorite games of all time.
That one right there was a big deal when it came out. And I, too, did not grow up playing the original Zelda games. My brother, I think, had the gold cartridge one for the Nintendo. But that was one of those games like, oh, this game's too hard for me. But now going back, I could probably go back and enjoy it. I actually enjoy more probably top-down view Zelda games now than I do more 3D ones, maybe with the exception of Breath of the Wild. But that one right there was such a massive jump, because I think it was, I'm not going to say the only game Nintendo had that was very narrative, but I think it was the one that felt kind of like something on a Lord of the Rings level, not just because it's, not just because it's fantasy, but just because it was this massive story that was very cinematic. It felt like you really were accomplishing something by the end of that game, and you were engaged throughout the stories and the characters.
Yeah, definitely. And the music, too. I mean, that game has some rockin' tunes. Mario does as well, but I find myself on Spotify listening to orchestrated and remixed and rearranged music from The Legend of Zelda, and it's one of my, my go-tos on my playlist.
Yeah, if I got to do some writing and I just want to listen to some music and I want the lyrics to kind of get in the way, every so often I might look for, like, I honestly don't know the names of most of these artists, but like lo-fi artists or something like that, just have something playing in the background. And there's a Zelda one called Zelda and Chill by, I think the guy's name is Mikel, something like that. And that's really good. It's really good. It has a lot of the classic songs, just in a chill, lo-fi beat, and a lot of it, of course, comes from Ocarina of Time, which is what I think turned a lot of people in our generation onto Zelda. I mean, you already have kids that grew up playing Link to the Past in the original, but at the same time, I think that was the one that really, like, oh my God. It was kind of like, really, people kind of think almost, despite the name, Grand Theft Auto 3, like that was like, they almost kind of did forget the other Grand Theft Autos beforehand, where it's like this little top-down view.
Yeah.
It was kind of weird and hard to control. And then you get to the Grand Theft Auto 3, like, oh my God, all the things you can do in this game. Then Zelda's kind of that same jump, minus the killing the hookers and selling drugs. But I mean, it's like that same jump, where it's this top-down view, felt kind of restrictive, but still was fun. And then it kind of goes on this huge, epic story.
One of the reasons that I love it so much was because the previous games were pretty cut and dry as far as a storytelling perspective, as far as, being a fantasy genre. The Legend of Zelda was really just, a bread and butter fantasy story. You have your elf hero, you save your princess, you gather the 8 or 7, mystical items, and you beat the game. Ocarina of Time, while it still, contains all those tropes, it really was the first entry in the series that really started to give it its own identity. It really started to dive more into the lore, the history of Hyrule. Bringing in Ganondorf gave a person to, regarding the villain, it gave more dimension to the bad guy instead of just being this blue giant pig monster thing. Suddenly you have someone who has motives, who has history, who has personality, who has someone that you interact with throughout the game instead of just seeing them at the very end. And it was a big turning point too, because many, if not all of the rest of the Zelda games to come afterwards always reference Ocarina of Time, either from a storytelling perspective or a gameplay perspective.
The thing about Ocarina of Time, I think, you said it became more of its own identity, because when you look at the first couple of Zelda games at that point, they're more of like, the way I can tell at least, they come across as more of like a Japanese dude's interpretation of Celtic lore. Like, oh, okay, a little bit of Sword in the Stone, King Arthur, some, like Irish stuff in there too, maybe. And then it jumps over to Ocarina of Time, and that stuff is still there, but then it kind of builds up more and more. And, because I'll be honest, I was never really into a whole lot of fantasy stuff. The only fantasy thing I was really ever into was I don't know why I said Lord of the Rings. I like Lord of the Rings, but the only one I was really, really liked is Legend of Zelda. And something about that, the way it all is, it feels more like its own world than this like medieval fantasy thing, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean? It feels like it's more of its own world than just kind of like just another dry and cut fantasy adventure thing. I think because maybe it's the species like the Zora, the Gorons, the what are the Gerudo? I always mix those two up, and there's plenty more, but yeah.
And then of course, Majora's Mask was definitely a underappreciated sequel, but I love just how psychological it is, how deep it is, how emotional it is. It's very short, but it is very dense and multi-layered, and I don't think it gets enough appreciation.
It's a game that's more looked upon more fondly now, especially just because it's. I think when you first want to just play through it, you just want to get through it, but now you realize, oh, there's so many things just go explore if you rewind time back, and then it's really about like what you have 3 days left to live. How do you spend it? So just that idea of you seeing different people. Like some people are just being kind of like, hey man, whatever happens, happens, I guess. Nothing we can do about it. You get some people that are genuinely afraid and just kind of just preparing for the worst. You get some people that don't care. Then you get other people who are just like blocking it to the back of their minds. I want to say there's one guy that was working on something, and in the last day he's still working. He's just working faster. Like there's nothing to be worried about. Nothing to be worried about. You know. So, but I just want to go back to Ocarina real quick. Another thing about that game is, I remember when you first become an adult, you go in, you're like, oh, you are the hero of time? That's awesome. Here's a sword. Bravo. I'm an adult now? Let's go do some adventuring. Then you run outside like, oh, is it fall already? Okay. And then you just kind of walk down in the main station, into the main square, and there's zombies everywhere. It's suddenly turned into the Deadites, and they whenever they see you, they're like, Wah! When they see you for a second. The first time that happens, you jump like, what? And I was like, oh, okay. I don't remember this here before. So it was one of those big jumps, like narratively. And then you go like, oh, wow, 7 years in the future, everything's messed up because of Ganon. Like this awesome lake is almost drained. All this stuff is just like, just almost falling apart. Like it's almost like the world's about to end. And then you go over to, going back to that, you go back to Majora's Mask and the idea of like the world is ending. And, of course, you save it by the end of the day, but that's just a kind of something that's deeper than I think a lot of people realize, because a lot of people just kind of played through it. I don't think they went and checked out what all the other characters were doing. And, man, time travel. I love time travel. I love, movies that are time travel. Even if it doesn't make sense, it's so much fun. So, again, that's a plus for the game. It has time travel. Both of them in different ways. Yeah, it seemed... Yeah. Did Link to the Past? I'm assuming that had time travel, right? You went to the Dark World. It's a parallel world, but there was no time travel involved. Even though the title has the word "past" in it, no, there's no time travel in that game. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, it's interesting. You know how? Did we talk about how the idea or part of the theme for Majora's Mask happened? Oh, I didn't know. You shared it with me, and it's such an amazing story. Yeah, so a couple of the head designers in that game were in a party in Korea. They're at a wedding, actually, in Korea. And it was right when North Korea was doing, like, they're flexing and just shooting missiles off over them just to kind of, like, intimidate them and test weapons. And... granted, all the weapons flew over them. Like, oh, wow. Well, they're really screwing with us right now. They're shooting weapons over us, and we're in the middle of a party. Everyone's having a great time here, but we're all just trying to kind of block it out. Like, everyone's having a good party. Everyone's having a good time at this party. At any moment, it could end, and they're all just trying to block that out. Just that idea. And that's like, God. So what if we take that concept and put that into Majora's Mask? I'm like, yeah, it kind of shows through. Knowing that game makes a lot more sense. Like how they probably looked at... wouldn't surprise me the least bit if they looked at how different people were interacting at the party, Yeah, some people, live in denial. Some people
obviously are anxious and stressed out. Others are angry and upset, and yeah, you're gonna get a spectrum of different reactions.
There'd be that one dishwasher who's like, "Look, it might be the last night in the world for us. We might as well go home. Like, hey, man, if the bomb comes down, we're all gonna die anyway. So might as well just get back to washing those dishes." So
Yeah, probably one of the saddest parts in that game regarding Romani's ranch, the two sisters.
oh yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, the Romani milk is, I mean, it's milk, but they make a point to mention how this is specifically for adults, alluding to the fact, that it's a kid-friendly version of basically alcohol. But on the last day, if you visit the ranch, you see the two sisters huddled in the barn, and the little sister is fast asleep because the older sister gave her some of the milk to spare her basically the pain and the horror of having to go through the end of the world.
Yeah, yeah. That right there is, that's a heavy theme right there. Especially whenever you just look up, like, oh, did the moon always have that creepy ass face? All right.
Apparently it did, because if you play the game and notice people's reactions, nobody says anything about the moon having a face. Everyone's freaked out because the moon is getting bigger. That's the thing that is scaring everyone, not the fact that it had a face. I think it's always had a face.
That's just.
I mean, this isn't Hyrule. This is obviously a different world, so they probably have different laws, different physics, different expectations of what is normal.
I assume this game also is probably what inspired a lot of kids. This is probably one of the first, I guess, the overall theme of the game and other things that happen in it makes it feel a little bit more like a horror film or a horror story. So, aside from the whole theory that Link might be dead, there's other things. Like, there's the Dooku who you become. There's some Dooku out there that's looking for his son. And at some point, you pass by a random, just shrub that's all, petrified. And then it's later implied that that's that guy's son that went missing, And you have his face or whatever. So there's sometimes... So there's some really dark things like that in the game. But then there's also, I feel like that went on to inspire a bunch of weird little kids to make creepypastas.
Yeah, those mask transformations, I mean, they were painful. Link would scream in agony every time he transformed. It hurt.
Mm-hmm. Because it was even hard to watch every time. Because, he had his eyes would be pitch black. He's like, ah! It's sinking into his skin. Yeah. Gee, okay, all right. Not every time.
It's basically like possession. I mean, every one of those transformational masks contained the spirit of a dead person. Which makes sense that the DQ mask that you get from the beginning came from somewhere. I'd love to theorize about the fierce deity mask, because where's the story there? Where'd that come from?
Yeah, I don't remember the whole... I actually never finished Majora's Mask, but I've seen other people play it. I think it was you, actually, who I watched beat it. So it was one of those things, just the saving aspect was the back and forth. Every... 3 days, you have to rewind time, so you had to hope you beat this level quick enough or something. But no, that game still is... I think the 3DS thing apparently fixed the 3DS port apparently fixed the saving states of that. But no, I would like to go back and play that game, because that is a game that I remember leaving an impact when I did play it.
Okay.
So, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't bring up another game around this era, Smash Brothers, which formed a lot of friendships, also ended a couple friendships, caused a couple fights too, but same time though, it was all worth it. I'll say it's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I say I love Zelda, I love Mario, I love Star Fox, and bam, here you have this game that has all of that and then some. Yeah, it was just like a dream come true.
Smash Brothers, because I remember that was one of those things, they're coming out with a fighting game where he plays Nintendo characters. I remember that was one thing that just blew our minds. And I remember I played it at a friend's house, and I later ended up renting it. And for whatever reason, it wasn't I don't think it was a holiday, but for some reason, and it wasn't summer either, But we had school off one day. I'm like, dude, come over. I have like Smash Brothers. We gotta play it. And then and then for whatever reason, we put the cartridge in and it wasn't working. You're like, I don't know. It was working yesterday. Oh, my other game's working. This one's not working. And then we went to that thing where you call the Nintendo technical support thing. And the guy literally had, I'm sure that's what most of it was. It was either kids asking like, hey, how do I beat the third level in Buck Bumble? Or it was like a dad saying, how do I hook this goddamn thing up, And I remember we called the guys like, oh, try taking it out partially and putting it back in. Just don't push it down the whole way. And after like an hour and a half of just trying to turn the thing on, like, oh, that worked. How about that? And that's all we did the rest of the day, I think, was just play that game.
It was a good day.
Mm-hmm. I remember it being like, even thinking back on that game, though, I do think it's weird of how many characters they have in that game. And one of the slots they saved was for Jigglypuff.
Every Smash Brothers game has a WTF character. And Jigglypuff was the first.
Yeah. That was one of them. Well, I guess by now we're all used to Jigglypuff. It'd feel weird if she wasn't there for it. But at the time, though, it was just like, of everybody, that one, okay, all right.
Well, you don't feel bad if you beat her up. She makes for a fun.
No,
target.
you don't. No, that was but no, I remember that game. Moving forward, because it was kind of hard to top. Like whenever like any video game company made like, oh, here's like all of our characters fighting together. Oh, you mean like the Smash Brother thing? None of them were ever as good as Smash Brothers. Not the PlayStation one. I think Sega tried one, but it didn't really. I think that was for the Saturn, but that may have even been before Smash Brothers. But yeah.
Yeah, I was never and still I don't consider myself a competitive player when it comes to fighting games. Like I didn't ride the I didn't play Mortal Kombat. I didn't play Street Fighter. I mean I have, but like not. I wouldn't consider myself a player, a competitive fighting player. But I don't really consider Smash Brothers in the same league as those games. For many reasons. One of them is you're not limited to a health system. There are no health points. The damage is a percentage, and you can win at high damage. You could lose at low damage. It has that platforming element that we're used to because we've grown up playing Mario Brothers. So jumping is second nature. So your survival and your technique relies not just on your combos, on the strength of your moves, or the how much health you have left, but just basic platforming. Just getting back to the stage, dodging attacks, moving around instead of always having your feet planted on the ground and staring at your opponent left and right and being limited to this side-scrolling screen. And then of course, that game had very, very simple move sets. You didn't have to do back, forward, down, double E, double A. It just those got really, really intricate, hard to memorize, to master, and it became difficult for new players to feel comfortable playing. But Smash Brothers just took that all away, and the most complicated thing you can do is move the joystick and push a button at the exact same time. So that's very simple. And with that, you have, dozens of different possible moves. And every character has the same moveset. The controls are the same. The only thing that's different is the outcome of the move. And that's where every character has their own style, their own personality. But as far as the gameplay goes, it's the same. You pick up one character and you can play with all of them because they all fundamentally handle the same way.
I feel like even though some people could go into that game and feel overwhelmed, it's kind of like a Mario Kart. I feel like a lot of people can just jump onto Mario Kart and play it no problem just because how straightforward it is. And that's going back to more of like probably Mario Kart 64, even the original Mario Kart, and even Mario Kart Double Dash maybe. But this one right here, it's kind of like that for fighting games because you do look at those, Mortal Kombat like moves to how I must remember all this stuff, or just kind of like, oh, this is a low tier character, this is a high tier character, this is a you hear all the technical terms. Like I love Street Fighter is one of my favorite franchises, but I'm not gonna lie, I suck at it, and I cannot tell you all the details of how and why this character is good or bad against that character. I just know the main. Here are the 3 moves I actually know how to do with this character. Beyond that, I'm probably just going to low punch and high punch most of this time. So, but Smash Brothers was one that was easier for people just to hop into, and I think it was also just that thing where I think that was like the last game, because there's that period when you're younger where our friends would come over to your house all the time, and you'd be people like all crowded around a TV, like 4 to 6 kids all just hunched around a TV, waiting for turns on this thing. And now we're at the point where people probably can still do that, but it's more online. I think that's something that a lot of kids this day and age don't know, because it's all online now. So they might have a few friends over, but beyond that, it's usually, oh, we're playing this online. And I think there's something different about just being in the room, being able to talk shit to the guy to your right.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is a competitive scene when it comes to Smash Brothers, and I was a part of that when Melee rolled around. I went to a few tournaments, and yeah, that can turn away the game for some people, getting too technical, being overwhelmed by those who know how to use and abuse the system.
Yeah. How far did you get in that tournament?
Oh, not very far. I did better at Mario Kart 64. I got second place in that.
Oh, there you go. There you go. I'll think I'm doing really good. I haven't played, like, even Super Smash Brothers Ultimate. Like, I really like it, and I'll play it a lot, but it's more of, like, I don't know. It doesn't have that same effect because it's not like... I think it's more of like an age thing and more of a social thing. Because something about that, it was about going over to your friend's house and playing it. And I can get on there and play the game with strangers, but do I really want to get my ass kicked and have someone talk shit to me who's a 12-year-old? No, not really, you know? So I rather just, you know... It's one of those games that, like, I think no matter what... I think they're gonna have trouble coming up to the next one with... Because they said they don't think every time they're going to put in every character that came before. That's more for this one. So we'll see how whatever the next one is, like probably 6-7 years from now, maybe. Who knows? But yeah, that game had a huge impact on me. What about I think we can't go without this era without talking about different console but same era, Pokemon.
Oh yeah, we didn't even touch about the Game Boy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the only Pokemon games I've ever actually played are, Red and Blue, or some variation of them. Like for instance, I got the Let's Go Pikachu for the Switch, but that's basically the same game as Red and Blue.
Yeah.
But yeah, taking that Game Boy on a playground was risky. You were rolling the dice there because if you got caught, that thing got taken away from you.
There was that. You also had... That was another thing that created a lot of... Because Pokemon was a big part of it, was the social aspect. And it was before internet was readily available for everybody. So people will say rumors, but the thing is, you didn't know if they were telling the truth or not, so you just have to go off that. So, essentially, you would go out and you would, some kid will tell you about, like, dude, I hear if you go to St. Anne and do this and do that, that if you use strength on a truck, Mew's there. And then like, oh, what? And that one was infamous. That one got around so much. That one spread, like, around the world like the coronavirus. But then it became this thing of, like, there got a lot more weirder ones. Weirder ones that had, like, what was it? There was, like more than Pokemon, the game itself, I remember more of it being, like, just so many crazy rumors behind it. That if you do this and do that, you get this weird character that's somehow in the game's deep data.
Oh, Missing No is actually in the game. If you catch him.
Missing No.
Yeah, if you catch him, it ruins your data.
The thing about Missing No, though, was one of those things where I remember everybody would get Missing No. So when I'll be honest, I got a little bit of this sense of like, well, because it does that thing where it multiplies all your stuff. So people just keep on going back and giving, their team red candy or rare candies and have a bunch of master balls. So basically I just beat the game super easily. And not that I ever thought that like, oh, I gotta beat this game with honor, but I was just like, it just sounds too easy. It sounds like I feel like I'm kind of cheating there. So I never did that. So whenever I go up and link cable somebody, I'd always get my ass kicked because they had like a level like 900 frickin' like Gyarados or whatever, and I'm like, oh, my guy's in his 80s, but I really worked hard to get there.
Yeah, you went all natural.
Yeah, didn't pan out, but still, it was one of those things. So it was still one of those games. Like I remember, Pokemon was one of the things that we kind of bonded over. That and Dragon Ball Z.
Oh yeah, yeah, those two definitely were top tier. I mean, everyone had knew someone who had an uncle working at Nintendo, so like
Yeah,
all those things that just went around, and you couldn't debunk it, because if nothing happened, chances are you were quote unquote doing it wrong, and
yeah. Like you must have messed up, or your game. Some games didn't have that update when it went out. Yeah, like it'd be something like that. And it was also like, what was it? There was
look,
I remember one time we were like in a bookstore, and some little kid. He was about we weren't that old, but this kid was probably just a little younger than us, just a little. Walked up and we were talking Pokemon stuff. He says, "Oh, there's a way to capture the Pokegods." The what? The Pokegods, yeah. So then he gives us this long, ridiculous, convoluted thing. Like, a place where you catch your Zapdos? You got to go talk to one of the goons in the third room in there. And if you do that, talk to him, then go over to this place and do this. They'll get something, and then you get the PHM for jump. And you go back to Pallet Town, you jump over the fence, and there you get to capture, like, this totem pole looking thing, which is actually a god. Or like, all right. Right there, that's where I'm like, I think this kid's lying to me. I'm not going to follow. I'm pretty sure this kid has to be lying to me because that just sounds way too complicated. And that's when I was really at a really gullible age too. So.
Yeah, gullible. That was me too.
Yeah. There was also the thing about that game was, I remember there was even that period where, because that game came, initially got me into it was the series, and then it made me want to get the game, and then I was playing the game, and then eventually I realized the series was doing the same thing over and over. By the time I got to Johto, like Silver and Gold stuff, that's where I kind of backed out a little bit. And I was playing the game, and I liked the game still, Silver, but then that's also when everybody else, like a hive mind, like, I don't like Pokemon either. And I'm like, well, I don't want to look like the odd one out. It kind of sucks now, So I came to peer pressure and stopped playing the game, and was kind of like that for a long time and just kind of scoff at it whenever it came up in conversation. But then, got a little older. I'm like, well, the games were fun. And then out of curiosity, went and bought Black for DS. Like, oh, this is a good series, good video game series. I mean, the whatchamacallit, the show is whatever, but I mean, the games themselves are actually still really well-made games.
Yeah. And I hear good things about Sword and Shield for the Switch.
It was good. I mean, here's the thing. It's weird, because I hear people talk about, like, well, you know what? I didn't think the story just had it for this one. I think the story was lackluster in this. I'm like, was it ever really a great story? I'll be honest. It's one where the story could take a back seat, and I can more fill in the gaps there. It's more of just fun to just kind of go out and capture them and do all that. I mean, at the end of the day, let's not lie. This thing is one of those things where it's like, how do you put it? Like, it's definitely one of those things. We didn't think about it when we were kids. Like, we're enslaving these animals. They're just minding their own business. But then in later iterations, you're like, oh, no, they like being enslaved. They do? Yeah. They think it's fun.
They want to get caught. They want to fight.
Yeah. There's even like that part in the Detective Pikachu movie where it's like, it has to choose you too when you catch it. Like, well, that's new.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, I got a little curious a little bit ago. I was home from work sick, not recently, but not with all this Corona stuff going on. But I was homesick, and I was like, you know what? Pokemon's on Netflix. I'm curious. I'm going to watch the first episode and see what I remember and all that. And I watched the first episode. It's roughly remember, but Ash literally says to Pidgey, he says, like, enjoy your last moments of freedom, Pidgey! Like, oh, jeez, that got a little dark. That got a little Third Reichish.
Well, he gets what's coming to him. All those sparrows, they're out to kill him.
Going after him. He steals a girl's bike, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's funny. I wonder how they're going to tackle that with any subsequent Pokemon movies.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, it's one of those things, like, I think that's sort of tiptoeing around it with Detective Pikachu, but at the same time, we'll see. I don't know. They're talking about, before all the Me Too stuff happened on him, well, actually, no, Max Landis apparently wrote a script that was a lot more of like a old Steven Spielberg movie about two trainers that are friends, and of all the Pokemon that are his, it's a coffin, I guess. Maybe it's probably one of those things like, yeah, Like, it was one of those things where he one of the last ones you'd expect, like, oh, it's like he's ugly and he's scary, but he's really sweet and he's your friend. I think they're just trying a different perspective like that, but still, it's like that's your flagship character. I mean, if you wanted that thing to get made, you shouldn't have picked Coffin. I'll tell you that right now.
Mm-hmm.
But
I agree.
But anyway, after that, like, it didn't. They won't go on Detective Pikachu anyway, and they played on other stuff, and he was pitching that thing around. But then I think he had some Me Too stuff pop up. Like, oh well, goodbye to that.
Yeah. So, back to the N64 and Pokemon.
Yeah,
I thoroughly enjoyed Pokemon Snap, and I kind of wish that they would have made a sequel for the Wii U, because like the gamepad would have made a perfect camera.
When I was younger, I assumed that game, when I heard it was coming out, I assumed it was kind of like this open world thing, and you'd run around, you have to explore and capture a picture, and just not just stay away enough distance for it to hurt you or kill you or something like that. They're like, oh, it's like you're in a little ride. Oh, okay. But then you're like, you know what? It's Pokemon in 3D. I'll take it. Okay.
I'm an A-type personality, so I played that game to death trying to get the best picture, redoing the level over and over and over again, perfecting every little mechanism to get the outcome for the highest score, so that was me.
I'm just waiting on hearing Professor Oak's judgment on it. You'd hear there'll be the background music, and then when there'd be the thing coming up, the BAM! Like, oh no, like that noise just be like a nail through your heart. When I was like, well, let's see what we have here. Like, BAM! Like, whenever it was like a downgrade, and then whenever it was just like something like was good, it was kind of like a cash register noise with Oak being great. Like, okay, good, I made it out.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then Pokemon Stadium, that was a fun game too. Obviously, like if you bring your team from the Game Boy games, it felt so personal, seeing them in 3D and fighting against your friends.
Yeah, that was one of those things where it just got to be like, it was just cool seeing your own team, because when it gets down to it, what was that thing? That was just the easiest. That was such an easy game to make. All right, we just got to put them in 3D, turn-based battle game. You just make matches, and beyond that, we have a couple of mini games. But yeah, no, after a while, that thing just kind of became like, because you could also plug your cartridge in there, and then you could play the game itself, the Game Boy game, on the 64. And after a while, that was like, okay, it's just the game Pokemon Blue machine kind of for me. You when I first got it, I remember playing it to death, but then after a few months, like, it's just playing the same thing in 3D. But I remember replaying games on Pokemon Blue on there. So
yeah, and then you mentioned how jumping off the bandwagon after Gold and Silver. When the Nintendo GameCube came out, there was a handful of Pokemon titles on that. And I missed them entirely. I didn't play any of them.
I didn't play them either. Well, I heard Coliseum. I thought Coliseum was like, oh, here's a game where you do go out into the world and do all that. It's kind of like a Pokemon game. But then I realized, oh, it's not. You're more on this one confined area, and you have some of that, but it's not like a full-on giant, expansive game like you'd expect it to be. So, yeah, it's one of those things. I'm surprised they waited till the Switch to do that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's about time. And here we are, 20 years later.
Yeah. But no, moving forward, and we're going to go from like Pokemon to like, I think another game that had a massive impact on me was Metal Gear Solid 2. I remember we both had this mutual friend, and he was that kid who, he was probably maybe 3 or 4 years older than us, and he was that kid who would totally show you like something you weren't supposed to see at that age. Like, he's the one that showed you Ninja Scroll. He's the one that showed you some anime that was super bloody and violent and had like, naked girls in it. You're like, oh my god, I can't tell my parents I saw this, and he like, you're like 9 or 10, he's like 15 or something. So he's just that guy. He's like, I'm here to corrupt the fellow youth. But anyway, he introduced me to Metal Gear Solid. Remember, he had Metal Gear Solid 2, despite what I said, he was a good guy, but there's just that thing, Anyway, there's Metal Gear Solid 2, and I remember not playing Metal Gear Solid 1 and watching him play 2, and just being like, oh my god, this game's amazing. And then I realized, wait, my brother just got this for Christmas, and he never really played it. And then I remember going when he wasn't in his room, just going in his room and just playing through that game and just being addicted to it.
Metal Gear.
Yeah, and there was that initial thing, even though I didn't have like as much of a close I liked Snake more. I thought he was cooler, but at the same time, I was like, I didn't play the first one. Like, oh, I'm not playing a Snake anymore. Okay, whatever. I wasn't like everybody else who was like, who's this guy? I was like, oh, it's this other guy. Okay, I prefer Snake, but whatever.
Yeah, at least Snake doesn't do cartwheels, in the nude.
Oh yeah, well he was still covering his stuff. He was careful about that.
Yeah, very acrobatic.
Yeah, that game was very. Thinking back on that, that's not the best of them, but it was still a fun game, and that was probably the game that got me into Metal Gear in the first place. So
yeah. Oh man, I'm a big fan too. When Twin Snakes came out on the GameCube, that was definitely, a dream come true. It was my first Metal Gear game because I never had a Sony PlayStation, so here was Metal Gear on the Nintendo. Even though that's kind of where it started on the NES. But again, like
yeah.
I didn't play the early games, so when Solid came around, that's where we really fell in love with the series, and I couldn't play it, until years later they brought it to the GameCube.
Yeah, I remember because I didn't play. I remember seeing people play the old original one, and then Twin Snakes came out on the GameCube, and it was one of those things of like, okay, cool. So I get to play through the original, but Metal Gear 2 art gameplay. That's cool. I remember really loving it and liking that one more than Metal Gear Solid 2. And then about maybe about a year ago, give or take, Spencer and I on the other show, we ended up doing like a retrospect on Metal Gear Solid. But I grew up playing Twin Snakes, not the one for PlayStation. So I remember like, okay, I was thinking the rules like, oh yeah, I can't do that, okay, whatever. And then when you first come out of that area where you're that little like place where you're swimming at, and then there's that one guard walking around, I'm like, okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do the little roll thing and like knock him out and take care of him from there. I'm like, oh, I was trying to do the roll, but I couldn't do the roll. I just realized I squatted down in front of him, like, you don't see me, and then sure enough, like that killed me a few times. And so I'm just seeing the context of the story. All those times Snake dies in the story, like he's our best guy, he's our only hope. Like, what'd he do? Well, he just kind of like crawled on his stomach in front of the guy, hoping he wouldn't see him. I guess he meant to roll, but it backfired in his face. So yeah, we're all gonna die now.
Yeah.
I just think of it whenever you're like this legendary badass character in a game and you die so stupidly. I just like to imagine the narrative within the story of like, what's the report? Like, well, I know we spent a lot of resources getting this guy, but here's what happened.
Roll credits.
Yeah. Well, that was my idea. All right, Roy, you're fired. There's the door. All right. Nah. But then again, I also realized, God, this game was so much harder back on the original PlayStation, just with those graphics. Because we played on the PlayStation Classic. That's how I replayed it. So I'm like, okay, this is gonna take a minute to get used to. But eventually, there's a small little things here and they're like, oh, okay, you just don't press on the button as hard right here, or don't do this like this. Yeah. So just small little things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But is there any other games that come to mind that were really formative for you back then, or?
No, I mean, I always tried to own a game from every franchise from a character in Smash Brothers. It's a weird thing of mine, but like when ends, the Smash 64, it's like, okay, I have all these characters. I need a Kirby game. I need a Yoshi game. I need, but like there was never a Metroid game for this N64. There was never an Earthbound game, and that bothered me. The completionist in me, I couldn't. I grind my teeth at that. But then when
isn't it so weird they never made a Star Fox game for Wii, or that is weird they never made Metroid for Nintendo 64.
Yeah, well, I think they tried. But then they ended up moving it to the GameCube because of the timetable. The N64, was coming to the end of its life.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Sonic Adventure 2 came out for the GameCube, that was amazing.
That was like, because I actually got a Dreamcast at the end of its lifespan. When you get a Dreamcast for like $100, and then most of the games are fairly cheap. So I remember like, well, let me get caught up on these, because Sonic I kind of fell off of because I never had a Sega Saturn, and they only made like 2 Sonic games for the Sega Saturn. They had like Sonic Jam, Sonic 3D Blast, and Sonic Jam was just a collection game. Oh, and then they also had Sonic R, which was horrible. So it was one of those things where just like, God, this is your mascot Sega, and you never even got a new, fully complete mainstream Sonic game on this thing. But okay. But anyway, so for a while I kind of dropped off Sonic because he wasn't, I had a Sega, I didn't have a Sega Saturn, and then it's like, well, you know what? Dreamcast is cheap. I'm kind of curious about that. So I remember getting that, and that's actually, I didn't get into Street Fighter through Sonic. I didn't get into Street Fighter through like Street Fighter 2 like everybody else. I got into it through Street Fighter Alpha 3 and Street Fighter Third Strike, which I got for very cheap on the Dreamcast at that point, since they're all going out. This is like going back to what you said about Funko Land. For those who don't know, folks, Funko Land is kind of like proto GameStop. There's like a bunch of different stores, like Funko Land, Electronics Boutique, Software, etc. They're all kind of loosely sort of connected in some weird way, but all did their own thing. We're barely managing, but there was just something whimsical and magical about them. And back then, I remember they having a really good selection. But I remember going in and just getting like a bunch of Dreamcast games for super cheap. And yeah, just building up like a last minute library because the thing was going out. And that's what got me into Sonic again. Sonic Adventure, Sonic Adventure 2, which I think was the last game for the Dreamcast, or one of them. And then Street Fighter was the other one. And then Jet Grind Radio.
Yeah, I don't remember if I had a Dreamcast. I recall playing it.
You probably played at my place.
Maybe. If I did have one, I think it didn't last long, and I probably ended up selling it.
I had one because I was like, well, there's no other way I'm ever going to play a Sonic game on this thing. And then like, oh, well, Sonic's going to Nintendo now. I'm like, never mind. Okay. But I could have just waited. But at the same time, I still enjoyed it for when I did have it. Because like I said, I really liked Jet Grind Radio. I liked the Street Fighter. It was a great game. It was also a great system for fighting games too. Just the way the controller was and all that. The Dreamcast was a weird one though, because it was that weird little hybrid, that little weird between, like after PlayStation 1, but not as strong as PlayStation 2. Like it was stronger than the 64 and stronger than the PS1, but it wasn't as strong as what was up to come next. So it was like that weird little middle ground, you know?
Yeah, it kind of was ahead of its time. And it had the removable memory card with the touchscreen on it, and it had some internet connectivity. I think it helped pioneer the leap in technology. It was a necessary step, even if it was, in retrospect, a failure. And obviously the death of Sega.
In some ways, I'm thinking back on Sonic Adventure, because that led into GameCube as well. But going to Sonic Adventure 1 for a second. That one felt like a jump just because it was kind of like the Mario 64 of Sonic games. And there's some things about it that aren't as smooth now that were when it first came out, like, whoa, Sonic's in our world? Whoa, that's so cool. But now it's like you have a movie coming out and like, why is he in our world? Why is he not on Mobius? It's almost kind of what you're thinking now. The movie was still good. I still liked it. But at the same time, it's one of those things where you just look at the game now. It's in some ways a little clunky, but still a fun game. And you got to keep in mind what it was dealing with at the time. You have such a fast character. What do you do to kind of like make a game that revolves around that character? Yeah,
I recently bought Sonic Forces on the Switch. It was on discount, and I thought, here's the latest, so it's gonna be the greatest. And I played it, and it just it's no. Give me Sonic Adventure 3. I'd much rather have that.
That game's so weird. You know what? Sega, it's a weird one because Sega has so many great properties, but really at the end of the day, Sega themselves, Sega the company, has a lot of great properties, and I have faith in like the developers and the programmers and all that. But the people running Sega are really the ones that always screw it up. There's so many like major like face plants with Sonic games for the last like 15 years, give or take. And the main reason is a lot of times they start off with this big ambitious project, but then someone in Sega comes in and changes it last minute and says, no, we don't have the money for that. Cut it short, or cut this short, or we change deals so you guys can't use this engine anymore. But you still have the same amount of time to get this thing done. So it's always something like that which screws them. So there's so many Sonic games that sound like they had great concepts, but then because Sega had to do some financial meddling, that always ends up screwing them over.
Yeah, ain't that the truth? You know,
Yeah,
no two Sonic games are really ever alike. They're all just so. They all have their quirks. There are things that work, and then things that don't work.
I feel like there are a lot of them are like a step forward and a step back. Like I feel like Forces wasn't a god awful game, but it wasn't a great game. It was also one of those things because that point they're like, you know what? 'Cause I feel like Sonic Adventure, because I feel like that's the game. Because like, oh look, Sonic looks a little bit more stylish and kind of cool or whatever. It has a little bit more of that kind of street art kind of thing. If you look at the cover, and then as it went on, it did a little bit more of this like. That's where I think a lot of people hopped on Sonic for the first time, and I think that's where a lot of the Sonic OC stuff came in, which eventually leads to Forces, where it's just like, here's your own original character. Like, oh, you're doing this, okay. They finally gave in.
Yeah, I mean, you type in your name and then add the hedgehog into Google, and you'll find something.
You'll find some nightmare fuel of some sort, yeah.
Yeah, there's a hedgehog for everybody.
My thing is, I remember I was like saying, I wonder how many people are mad about the lack of options you can do. Like, man, I can't make my own OC Sancho the platypus. Why can't I, just like these, or Abraham the giraffe. I really want like just this giraffe that runs really fast with a stupid dangling neck dragging behind him. Stupid long head just bumping into everything, like killing everything as he runs by. Yeah. No, I could imagine something like that. But going back to that, Adventure was one of those things where at the time I remember being like, this game is serious. There's actual narrative to it. There's dialogue. Sonic's trying to stop the end of the world. A giant tidal wave comes in, and oh my god, this is amazing. And now looking back, like, oh no, it's kind of typical end of the world kind of game with. It's a very by the number. Now you call that, I guess, more of a by the numbers kind of adventure game now. But at the time, though, I remember just feeling like amazed that it was a Sonic game that had like that much story in it.
Yeah, it did. It was kind of a rejuvenation for the character, and he needed it at that point.
Yeah, he did. I still like that game, and I still enjoy it, but. There is some of those things, like some things don't hold up as well. Certain things about the game is true. It's not a perfect game, but it is a fun game. So yeah, same thing with Sonic Adventure 2. That one though, that's where I think Sonic's an interesting series to just analyze itself, because Sonic was made as the anti-Mario, because he's like the young hip version of Mario, and then eventually like, well, we need something tougher and edgier than Sonic, so that's when they brought in Knuckles. When eventually Knuckles became the good guy, and then we go like, all right, what's really popular right now? Well. Emo is starting to come out. Kids really like anime, and anime always has like the angsty anti-hero character. So that's I think where Shadow comes from, And then from there, I think the next thing they could do is like, all right, well, now Shadow's kind of a punchline. What do we do now to reach out and make things kind of resonate with audiences? Well, what if Sonic is kind of dry, sarcastic, and he wears a lot of scarves? It's like, oh, so make him kind of like a hipster? Yeah, kind of like a hipster, yeah.
yeah. Always trying to reach every new generation.
Which
is not us anymore. We're not their
us.
Market.
I don't want to be that guy. I feel like we are, and I feel like we're not. I feel like that it's us that are going to be there to buy the new Sonic Mania game. But at the same time, if they go... I haven't bought every Sonic game since, I think I jumped off at Lost World. First off, I didn't have a Wii U, and then didn't look good to me. I didn't get Sonic Boom because I didn't hear anything good about it, and Forces and Mania were the last two I played, and Forces was kind of meh. kind of, And then Mania though was everything I wanted it to be.
Yeah,
so.
Sega didn't make that. That's probably why it was so good.
Yeah, they really just got to lease their characters out to things. I mean, I think that's what Streets of Rage 4 is doing. Yeah, so. But anyway, I remember like, Sonic is also really good at like taking something that already exists and like, is that the Death Star? No, it's the Death Egg. Don't question it.
Yeah. All right, so we've definitely moved quite a ways from our video game timeline there. And
I think that's kind of as far as it really goes, though. I mean, I think high school is still kind of formative. High school, middle school is still kind of like, who am I? I don't know. Let me play Sonic Adventure 2. I contemplate that.
Yeah, but, in secret. You don't want people knowing.
Yeah. So, beyond that, though, yeah, I think that kind of maybe just about covers it for maybe this episode as far as retro formative games. Anyway, so this is just something we're trying out. We're going to I don't think we'll be doing like every week, maybe like every other week or something like that. We're still going to figure it out, just more of time. Plus, right now, everything's really crazy with the coronavirus and trying to iron out a schedule and all that. But, time being, once again, like I said, just wanted to try out a new podcast with a close friend of mine since, we'd hardly ever get a chance to talk anymore. So I'm like, you know what, this might be a good way to keep it going. So I'd like to keep this going, so we'll see what happens. We'll see. It's all a matter of timing and, availability, really. But yeah, so next episode, don't know what it's going to be. We'll figure it out between here and there. But yeah, is there anything you'd like to plug before we go, James?
No, it's always a pleasure to catch up with you, to talk, our nerd heads off, and, to catch up, be silly, be stupid, waste time, and hopefully waste other people's time too. Thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, folks. Anyway, we're going to sign out here. I'm Ryan Dunnigan.
And I'm James Artville.
And you folks have a good day.